Hi, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to talk about Kirsten Edkins' new record, Shapes and Sound, and I really want to focus on the music. This is the first record from Kevin Gray's Cohearent Records, and if you don't know about what Cohearent Records is and the cool setup he's got there, I highly recommend you watch Steve Westman's interview with Kevin Gray and Kirsten Edkins, and you'll learn all about it. And the Kevin Gray studio that he built and his recording chain is why I was interested in the record in the first place. And when I put it on while I was listening to hear the sound of the musicians in the room and this very naturalistic feel, that did come through, but I thought the music was really striking too. And I don't know that is the way that this album is being universally received. And there are definitely aspects of the album that do kind of make it feel maybe like it literally is an easy listen. Not that it's a easy listening or smooth jazz album, but it's doesn't have a lot of things that will get your hackles up if you're not a super hardcore jazz fan. And I think that can maybe come off as then it's somehow not that serious, or this is just like hotel lobby jazz. And it's hard to find a good comparison for this record. Steve Westman, in the interview with Kevin Gray and Kirsten Edkins, mentioned something about Kind of Blue. So in comparing this album in any way to Kind of Blue, that's obviously going to set off strong feelings among people. I'll come back to that one in a minute. But maybe I think a more interesting point of comparison, meaningful for this, is there seems to be a contingent out there that is positioning this album against Moanin or a hard bop classic. And Moanin and Kind of Blue are both great. I love both those albums. Those are from 1959. So I don't know how meaningful it is to think about musicians today recording something that's going to sound, sonically like out of Kevin Gray's studio from 1959. Yes, but stylistically, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because the musicians today they've grown up with the benefit of hard bop already existing, Charlie Parker and bebop already existing, Louis Armstrong already existing, modal jazz is already a thing, post bop is already a thing, and the musicians on Kirsten Edkins' album have mastered all those idioms. And I think the album is actually a pretty cool showcase of that. It starts off with Party Slug, which has got a Latin feel, and the musicians are just as comfortable with that as they are with Bird Shapes, which is a Charlie Parker contrafact of confirmation, moved up to a different key just to make it a little more challenging. Kirsten talks about that in the Steve Westman video I keep talking about. So these are musicians who've learned hard bop as a canon, and they're not participating in hard bop as an emerging style or refining the style like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers were. And there's plenty of albums that have come out lately that are interesting that aren't Moanin either. Bill Frisell's latest album, 4, is great, and he's a killer player, but there's not a lot of burners on this album. It doesn't have a lot of drive-in. It's a pretty relaxing listen, to be honest. Gerald Clayton, the piano player on this album, incidentally, is also on Shapes and Sound. Emmanuel Wilkins, I'm sure he can play however he wants. How he wanted to play on Seventh Hand is not like hard bop. And same thing with Joel Ross, Parable of the Poet. It's great. I love this album. It is a very kind of moody, I would say like spiritual jazz album, but then that has kind of connotations of maybe kind of being harmonically out there, like free jazz, and it's not that either. So I will say, if what you want is some sort of ground-breaking iconoclastic album, you might find that in Shapes and Sound, but you're going to have to sit with it and look pretty hard for it. If that's your cup of tea, then the music on Shapes and Sound might not be your favorite thing. For that, I'd recommend J.D. Beck and Domi. This is definitely something that I think is more in the spirit of people who like Miles Davis for trying to just find the next thing and not be too referential of the past. Whether or not I can hear it in their music, you can find videos of Domi and JD Beck, playing over jazz standards, and they're just absolutely shredding it. So they have the capability to play something kind of more straight ahead, and that's not what's happening on this album. So if that's what you want, then I can say, yeah, Shapes and Sound, it is not Domi and JD Beck. But I want to talk about just my experience with The Goose, the last track on side one, as a way to show that this album, I think, ought to be taken seriously. And if you heard it once and you thought, oh, this is like a really nice sounding album, maybe I could put it on at a dinner party, but there's not a lot of there. It's really just a showpiece, a demo album for the feel of the recording. I hope after this, maybe you'll take it off the shelf and give it another critical listen, and you might find that there was more going on in the music than you may have expected. So The Goose starts off with this little figure on the saxophone, which sounds like this. So when I first heard the song, because nothing is going on yet, it's just the saxophone playing these notes, you've got, how does it go? Sorry. So there's nothing to really say what's going to happen one way or another at that point. So everything I'm going to talk about now couldn't possibly have happened without the benefit of a repeated listens to the song. As I heard it, I thought what was happening is actually the track was going to be another contrafact. So a contrafact is the chords from another famous jazz song with a different melody put over it. And I already mentioned that Bird Shapes is a contrafact of Charlie Parker's Confirmation. And I thought what we were getting was a contrafact of the Billy Strayhorn tune, Take the A Train, specifically when I started to hear this sound. So I thought, oh, well, this is kind of interesting. Another nod to, the classics. But then it got to this part in the song, and I realized, oh, this is actually even cooler than I thought. What we have here is a contrafact of another Charlie Parker tune. It's a contrafact of Donna Lee, which is actually written by Miles Davis, but credited to Charlie Parker. At any rate, once I realized that was happening, I had kind of, I had forgotten, I wasn't listening that close to it, honestly. But when I went back to listen again, knowing that what we were dealing with was actually a contrafact of Donna Lee, which I had mistaken for the A Train, which starts off with this little figure that I played for you at the beginning. Here it is again. Then this got a lot more interesting, and I want to unpack it a little bit. So the chord changes to Donna Lee / The Goose. Quickly, the first part just kind of goes. That's kind of half of the form. One fun thing about The Goose is they add an extra measure. The whole song kind of hangs for an extra 4 beats at the end of the form on the intro and the outro, but it doesn't do that at all on the solo sections. It's just a straight ahead set of Donna Lee changes. If I'm going to resist the temptation to get into the analysis of all those chords, but I just wanted you to hear that there's a lot of them, right? So if this was a blues song, instead of all those chords, there would just be 3 chords. There would be like. So that would be a blues form, way fewer chords. But with Donna Lee, there's a lot of chords. And so what do you do when you have a lot of chords is an interesting question, both melodically and as a soloist. So just a little bit of history. Donna Lee is itself a contrafact of a different song called Back Home Again in Indiana. And the way Back Home in Indiana handles all the chords is actually the melody doesn't particularly participate in all of the changing of the chords. So you've got, it's originally in E flat, but I'll do an A flat just to keep it simple here. So the melody of Back Home Again in Indiana goes like, back home again in Indiana, and it feels like I can see the gleaming candlelight still shining bright through the sycamores for me. So the important part about that is there's times where the chords are moving and the melody is just not doing anything. So right at the beginning, back home again, just one note that whole time, but there's 3 chords happening. And one way to handle all these chords is to kind of pick and choose which parts of them you're going to play over. Of course, another way to handle all the chords is to do something in response to all the chords. And so Donna Lee, which is the melody or the head that Miles Davis wrote over the same chord changes, is very different indeed. If you don't know that, slowly, the head to Donna Lee is... Oh, it's about the same amount. I played a couple clams in there, but we're going to let it slide. The point is that that melody is so busy, in part because the song seems to be built around doing something every time the harmony moves or there's a new chord. And then songs typically play much faster. So like... about like that. So you've got one option is to play sparingly. One option is to play over all the chords. And if you listen to the original Donna Lee track, that's kind of how it happens. Charlie Parker, after this very frenetic melody written by Miles Davis, his opening statement is pretty relaxed. He just goes, and then the next chord just happens and he doesn't do anything. When Miles Davis' solo comes around, he's playing very busy, doing something in response to every chord. Eventually, Charlie Parker's solo gets up to that as well. So you have kind of 2 basic strategies, and then a third strategy would be to do something that is not particularly tethered to those chords at all. So to play some musical idea and not be bound by the harmony, which is actually in a way similar to Kind of Blue. Kind of Blue, the modal idea that Miles Davis had was inspired in part in an attempt to not kind of be held prisoner to the chord changes that always come back around. So Donna Lee, for example, is a 32 bar format, and Miles Davis got to a point where he was complaining that no matter how many musical ideas he had that he wanted to explore, every 32 measures, the whole thing would start over again. And then, if you're playing inside of those chord changes, then you'd have to start over again too. So what, for example, is built off of, it's not really built off of chords. It's just a certain amount of time spent using one scale to make whatever melody you want to make, and then it moves to a second scale, and then it moves back to the original scale, and you can kind of stretch out more. So those are the 3 options. The interesting thing about A-Train, I'd never made this connection before. So again, this is why I appreciate this album so much. As I was trying to think, like, well, how did I think this was A-Train in the beginning? Instead of thinking about what is the melody doing in response to a very busy set of chord changes, again, Back Home Again in Indiana is... There's not too much happening there. So you could think about that as the melody is just kind of sitting out some of the chord changes, but then we could also say, well, the melody is the melody. Maybe the melody is the most important part of the song. So why do we need those extra chords if we're not doing anything with them melodically? And so if you take out the chords that Back Home in Indiana doesn't particularly make use of, you end up with something that is awfully similar to Take the A Train. You end up with this set of chord changes. So if you don't know Take the A Train, maybe the similarity isn't super obvious there, but that's identical to the second A of the A Train form, essentially. And one of the things that helped me put ears on that was the fact that in Take the A Train, in the Strayhorn classic, he doesn't just go, so it's in the key of C. So he doesn't just go to this chord with this kind of standard sound, which happens in a lot of songs, like Exactly Like You is another standard that uses that. Instead, Billy Strayhorn throws in this sound. So this note here is the sharp 11. I think that's as nerdy as I'm going to get with the theory. That sound connotes a particular type of harmony and an associated set of notes that might go with it. So if you listen to the goose right in the melody of the song, you start to hear that sharp 11 sound come out. And in the context of the goose, that chord is played by Gerald Clayton on piano, and you got this note here. And more generally, that type of harmony is, oh, sorry. My guitar is a little out of tune there. So that is called like a whole tone scale. So that's peppered throughout the melody of the goose. And like I said, I never made the connection that in a way, the Take the A Train changes are a subset of the Donna Lee changes with just the parts that count in terms of the melody. So already, I don't know like if Kirsten Edkins did any of this on purpose, but there is this intense mixture of this clash between Donna Lee and Take the A Train. So then what was particularly striking about the whole thing in terms of the intro, which I said, those notes seemed important, is if we kind of break down what Kirsten Edkins is playing in her little ramp up to the melody, she starts on this note. I can't really do it on my guitar, but what that is setting up isn't particularly the A flat major chord. And it's not setting up the A flat major chord with the typical way you would do it, which would be with a E flat chord. Like the notes there are actually like bluesy. So if you play guitar, those notes are in this family. This is a different type of harmony, and these notes, this note in particular, it's not in the scale of the song, this A flat major scale. So Kirsten Edkins' little horn ramp up to the melody is apart from the harmony. So it's the third thing I talked about. It's not playing a little melody in relation to the first chord and then laying out. It's not playing a melody in direct relation to all the chords. It's playing a melody that exists apart from that, or like playing a little bit outside, but not just any outside. This is playing in a blues vocabulary. And I don't have super deep, exhaustive knowledge of the history of recordings of Donna Lee, but this is the first one that's jumped out at me as opening with a blues statement. So when the actual melody starts in this call and response, you get, how does it go? So now this is where it gets interesting. Back to Steve Westman. Kind of like Kind of Blue. These notes that Kirsten Edkins plays are consistent with blues language, but actually they're outlining this particular family of notes. And what that is is the very scale that Miles Davis used on So What. It's called the Dorian mode. So this is introducing a new set of jazz vocabulary into a familiar set of changes that's been done a couple different ways. And this is not only a new way, what Kirsten Edkins is bringing with the saxophone is this blues way, or with this like Dorian modal language. And then what Gerald Clayton brings with the piano is just take the A-train language. So there's two things that at least I hadn't heard before against the Donna Lee changes happening at the same time. And now as you listen to the song, what I'd like to listen for is who's doing what when, which parts of the tradition of the Donna Lee set of chord changes are the players going to use at what time, which chords are they going to decide to play over, when are they going to decide to rest, when they do play, are they going to use a bluesy language, are they going to use, which would be like, these notes, really these two particular notes, we don't need to get into what those are. Are they going to use, I think this is the easiest one to hear, the kind of sharp 11 harmony. Jeez. Or are they going to do kind of like a bebop type language, which that has, get into it right here, but that has its own flavor. So there's this incredible back and forth. It's really fun to listen to. I'll just say one of my favorite moments in the song is when Kirsten Edkins is wrapping up her first chorus of soloing. Going into the second chorus of her solo, Gerald Clayton lays down one of these an ascending figure with the sharp 11 harmony, and she hears that and quotes it back and then takes off with it. So here's that moment quickly. So I just thought that's great. The whole band is listening to each other. They're really feeding off of their energy. The main call and response theme of the song is stated 3 times, twice in the beginning, once in the end. And rhythmically, it's a little bit different each time. So the band stays kind of metronomically on the same beat, but sometimes they really lurch forward and, as a whole, advance the melody a little bit more quickly in places where it could last longer, and then other times they do kind of hold it back. So if you take the 3 statements of the melody and you try to line them up with each other, you'll find that the beats are happening at the same interval, but there's times where they just stretch the thing or compress it. So that was all happening kind of in the room, I don't know, like musician telepathy. And something that I just noticed recently is the head comes 3 times. It starts as Kirsten Edkins doing kind of the call figure, and then Gerald Clayton and Ahmet Turkmenoglu on bass, they're doing the response together. So piano and bass together as the response. The second time through the head, it switches. And then the last time, it switches too. So what you get on the whole is everybody plays the call at least once. Everybody plays the response at least once. And the piano is paired with the bass some of the time, and the saxophone is played with the bass, paired with the bass some of the time. But it's so fluid, I didn't notice it for a long time. So there's a lot going on just in this track. The goose, of course, focusing on the kind of melodic and the soloing here. Another interesting thing about the song is that the kind of traditional role, the rhythm section with Chris Wavich on the drums, and then the bass, is that they're not just like laying down and keeping time. And they're actually, there's times where they're hardly playing at all or just playing accents. There's a nice moment towards the end of the song where the bassist goes from when he is playing kind of in a rhythmic way, it's like really outlining the chords, and there's a time where he kind of opens up and does what sounds to me like a pedal, kind of like what Paul Chambers did on the B section of Milestone. So that little snippet is right here. So listening to the song, listening to what each instrumentalist is doing, when they're playing, when they're not playing, how they're interacting with each other. There's just so much going on in the song. I've heard it maybe 50 times now, and every time I hear something new. So I wanted to put this out there. If this helps anybody appreciate it, it's pretty dense, and the whole album is. I just think it's so great when you have these players who can play anything, then the question is, well, what are they choosing to play? And that says something, interesting to me too. I like to think about that as I listen. So if you put this record on, you thought, oh, that's kind of neat, and I can't wait till Kevin Gray's next record, and you stuck it on the shelf, and you didn't know when you were going to listen to it again, I'd say, pull it down and give it another listen. It doesn't just have to be dinner party music. So thanks for checking this out. I'm going to be making some more videos soon. If you recognize this in the background, that's going to be Review Next. If you know what that album is, go ahead and mention it in the comments. And if you totally disagree with what I had to say here, let me know in the comments too. Thanks.